Hello, everyone. My name is Angela Peacock. I am one of the subjects of the film Medicating Normal. I also volunteer doing outreach for the film, and I like to host conversations like this one. This is our 11th interview, and today our guest is Zheni Nasi. Zheni Nasi, MA, has a degree in diplomacy and psychology. Her professional life extends across countries in the fields of diplomacy. She's worked at places like the United Nations High Commission on Refugees in Greece, conflict management with the Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto. She's done healthcare with Health and Human Services in New Jersey and social justice at the Maytree Foundation in Toronto. She is a member of the board of the Association for the Anthroposophic Psychology Foundation in North America and a representative to AAP and the International Federation of Anthroposophic Psychotherapy Association in Switzerland. Zheni works from a humanistic and transpersonal trauma-informed perspective. She uses an individualized approach to therapy. Among various modalities she employs, Anthroposophic psychology has given her the most comprehensive understanding of the human being and human suffering, as well as the most insights to a healthy therapeutic relationship. I'd also like to give you a brief introduction into what anthroposophy is, because I'm sure you've heard that word and not sure what it is. So anthroposophic psychology says it as it is. Psychology is the study of the soul. Anthroposophic psychology considers how striving to balance soul capacities, that is the thinking, feeling, and will, can help the human being reach their full potential. It has a deep appreciation of intricacies and interdependence of the human being as a microcosm of the universe that we live in. Anthroposophic psychology is an integrative approach and may include other therapeutic modalities like guided imagery, body movement, working with clay, watercolor painting, pastel drawing, psychodrama, mythopoetic, and/or storytelling. Thank you so much for joining me today. Zheni, I'm excited about this conversation. First, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself so our audience can get to know you? And you can also bring in the film, like how we met you, if you'd like to.
Yes. So I have been living in North America, US, and Canada in the last 21 or so years. And right now I'm in Canada. I have been in the field of counseling and psychology in the past 10 years or so. We met with you and Wendy last summer, and you were gracious enough to bring the Medicating Normal to the audience of the Association for Anthroposophic Psychology. And we had a wonderful panel with people from England, from US, and it was very enriching to all of us who attended that. So yeah,
that's how we met. I remember that talk. It was very not our normal talks. Usually we talk about surface things like pharmaceutical corruption or diagnosis, and we really dove deep into the soul and what does it mean to have a mental illness and all these really more philosophical than that we're used to. But I really enjoyed that. I so enjoyed that. So can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to psychotherapy? How far back does your interest in human beings and suffering go?
Oh dear. Well, growing up, there were no psychological services. We're talking Eastern Bloc in Europe. And yet it was very clear violence, be it domestic violence toward women or children, addiction, alcoholism, were very much in the open. It was very intriguing to me that these things were happening, and people who were harming others would, one moment this would happen, and another moment this would be just regular members of the society. So it was intriguing to me how this was different. There was something from within, something that was invisible. It was not like you have a wound, you clean it, and then it heals, right? So the treatment itself had to go from within. And this was only intuitive because I did not have any theoretical background at that time. Another aspect was when I was little, we used to have psychiatric hospital at that time. that I lived close by. And the different reactions that people had, I mean, even amongst children, some would have fear and some would laugh at people behind bars. And I vividly remembered having a heartache. So these were questions that I have lived with from a young age.
Mm.
Yeah, and then I moved through, I left the country after high school. I got a scholarship to study international relations in Greece. And then I moved to the US. I did a degree in diplomacy. When I settled in Canada and decided to have a family, I really found myself with these existential questions. How can I care for others? Do I know how to take care of myself? And really this soul surge brought me back to that dream that I had in high school to study psychology, which was, it was made possible through the study of anthroposophy. The two came together at the same time and really allowed me to address some of these existential questions.
Mm. You're very much like me. As a kid, I always wondered, like, why do people throw trash in the street? Like, but is that something in their mind that makes them, I would always have, strange questions like that. And I think some of us are more, curious about that, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about anthroposophic therapy and maybe how it's different than traditional therapies? A lot of our audience would probably be familiar with like CBT, cognitive behavioral, the more medical approaches. Can you talk about the difference?
Yeah, so you said a little bit, maybe I can just elaborate on the name itself. So psyche is soul from Greek, and anthropos is the potential human being, and Sophia is the inner wisdom in us. So the question that anthroposophic psychology addresses is, how can we reach our full potential as human beings through understanding our soul capacities and the innate wisdom that is in us. Now, from that perspective, if we look at, we have about 400 different psychotherapeutic approaches that are recognized in the field. And where do they vary from each other? I mean, the goals are all noble, right? But where do they vary? And one thing is the view of the human being. For example, in cognitive behavioral therapy, we look at the individual, at the client, as someone who is able to learn to adjust their faulty thoughts and beliefs, right? And it's happening now in the present. Coming back to anthroposophic psychology, the human being is seen as a microcosm within the macrocosm. So it's this holographic picture that we have and how we mirror each other. So what happens also in therapy, that's what the therapist does, is able to see the best in the client and to hold that as a mirror, enabling and allowing those that mirror, that image, to inspire the person in front of us. And when we are seen for the essence of who we are, and that essence is always pure, and when that is invited in the midst amongst us, that serves as an inspiration. When we are seen and heard for who we are able to, we have higher possibilities to reach our full potential. So this is one way of looking at it. However, this is done in a very meticulous way from the side of the therapist.
I really like that. So is it in a way like you recognize the person is suffering, but you can see kind of through that even beneath the suffering, there is this pure soul in there that's experiencing this hard thing.
Yes.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Okay, so part of the human, like you just kind of talked about the human potential. Can you talk about our capacity to grow, to learn, to heal, even in the midst of suffering?
Oh, yeah. So anthroposophic psychology has, I would say, a salutogenic approach to how we view the human being, but also to suffering and healing. I remember from school when we would study Darwinian evolution, I was left with this question of, okay, this evolution has happened through the millennia, but where is the evolution happening now? Are we bettering ourselves now? And what am I doing as a human being to better myself? So it left me always as something was missing. I was looking for something more. So in our understanding of the human being from the lens of anthroposophic psychology, we grow throughout our life. Just the growth happens through different members of our body. So we talk about physical growth, we talk about psychological growth, and we talk about spiritual growth. And this was not only very powerful, but it gave me hope that we have that potential in each stage of our life to grow. For example, from 0 to 21, we have no option but to grow physically, right? Unless there is neglect and the person is not allowed to grow in their physicality. But as a human being, as an individual, I don't need to do anything. I have these growing forces within me, right? And then we look from 21 to 42, we consider that as psychological growth. It doesn't mean that psychological growth does not happen from 0 to 21, quite the opposite. But the predominance is in the physical growth. And the others, the caregivers, parents, teachers, they play the role of holding, of caring for our psychological growth. And moving from 21 to 42, and these are approximate, they're not fixed. We grow through our struggles at a soul level by meeting the world. How do I meet the world? What are the challenges that I now meet in the world? And then we have from around 42 to 63, the potential. And this is the beauty of it, because the growth during this stage, this is where we are free. We can go for the Porsche or Botox, or we can go for our calling in life.
Yeah.
And these are not new concepts. We have Erik Erikson talks about the 8 stages of psychosocial development. We have Lawrence Kohlberg, he talks about moral development.
Hierarchy of needs, like once your lower needs are met.
Yes, Maslow's. So these are not new concepts, but in anthroposophic psychology, these become very interwoven into each other, and everything, it's like, yes, it makes sense.
Yeah, I often think, like, recently I've just been like, I'm done, I'm burned out on self-help. I don't want no more therapy. I don't want to work on myself. I don't want to look for anything. And I took a long break. But then there was still this urge inside, like, but wait, there's something missing, so there's now a regeneration of like, okay, I do want to look at some things. But I think even when you take a break, there's still growth happening. There's still the people I meet on the street, the way that I treat the postman, there's still things happening. Even when I say, like, I don't want to change, I don't want to grow anymore, I'm tired of growing.
But life offers us the opportunity, and it is our choice how we take that offering.
True. Yeah. So there's also we touched on this last, but about the therapeutic relationship. Now I just graduated from social work school, so this was emphasized, but very little emphasis was put on how exactly do you create a healthy therapeutic relationship. The other point I want to bring in is that research shows it's not the kind of therapy you get, it's actually the therapeutic relationship that heals. Yeah. And I know for sure that I've experienced that, where I had a therapist that was just loving and kind to me. And you might say, like, kind of in that parenting role that was like, reparenting, me in a way. And just that love was what was healing. It wasn't that, the CPT or CBT or whatever letters, that wasn't really the reparative part. So can we talk a little bit about therapeutic relationship? What is it? How does it form? And, even fractures, there's fractures often. And then how do you repair those?
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is, yeah, a great topic. Now, what one emphasis in Anthroposophic psychology is, first of all, the work that the therapist does themselves. Not only, addressing the our own wounds. We often talk in the field about the wounded healer, but also how I am with the person in front of me. So even in our training, we'll look at first, know thyself. And this is not a one-year training that it takes to know thyself. It's a lifetime. So being aware of this know thyself happen throughout life is humbling, from the sense that as a therapist, I do not know it all. I am with you in this journey, and I have the privilege of being with a person who is opening their heart. And yet, on the other hand, I am here not, and we do this, we work with gestures as well, of sympathy. I'm pouring all myself to you. I'm being one with your pain. Of antipathy, I want nothing to do with you, or to notice what in you is arising antipathies in me. And also the gesture of empathy, when I'm centered and I'm making myself available. So even experiencing these in our body becomes very, very real, very visceral. But the other thing that I also mentioned earlier is having this view of the human being and seeing suffering with dignity. Being in a therapeutic relationship by no means is a position of power, quite the opposite. It's a sacred space. So that as a therapist, it's like a three-dimensional space: I, thou, and the space between. So not only I need to be aware of my own center, where the person in front of me is, but how each of us is nourishing or is affecting this space in between.
Yeah.
So that creating that empathic resonance is very significant.
I have to tell you, I mean, this topic right here is, in my training, they were very much, learn the behavioral evidence-based therapies. You need to be, you need to have the latest research and do that kind of therapy, or nobody's going to take you seriously. I chose to do the Gestalt route, which is all about what you just said. And I can tell you, I practiced with my fellow therapists, like we had our own study group, and we would do it on each other. And then I would use some of those tenets like in practice with other people. And I can't even explain it. I don't know, but it's like a sacred thing that's happening. I'm sitting grounded in my chair, listening, so present that I hear and see every movement that the person is making. They're in a relationship with me as they're talking. So then not only are they telling me about their life and their suffering and their trouble, but there's a relationship between me and them happening in the real moment, like as we are talking. And we're going to talk about this in a second, but there's something about being extremely present, grounded, open, that it's almost like the time in the room stops and you can feel the air is different. I don't know how to explain. It's not the same air as when you're getting like a CBT therapy, or when you're, you know what I mean? It's some kind of sacred with witnessing. I can't explain it. It's not going to show up in your textbook as evidence-based. Like, it's just otherworldly. I don't know, but that is the only place I like to be. And it's very hard. And it's not something that you strive for. It's something that naturally unfolds when people are open.
Yeah.
But also while you were talking, it reminded me of, we read a book called The Gift of Therapy by Irving Yalom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, I just love that book. And some of it was like, I don't really agree with that. But in that book, he said, a therapist can only take you as far as they have gone themselves. And to me, there was, some people cringe at that, like, no, not everybody has to experience rape or war, or, you know, and I agree with that. But the depth of like inner, you know, looking at yourself, of working on yourself, of feeling great suffering and not trying to fix it, of just sitting in it. I do think there is merit to that.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah. And this goes sometimes to what is referred in the field as trauma with a lower T or a capital T. And that's how the person who experiences it perceives it. So to ask that one-on-one mirroring, that's not the case to me. It's going into the darkness of our soul and experiencing it. And in pain, it's not age or color or gender, none of these matter. You're with a human being one-on-one in pain. And we've all experienced that. So, which brings us in that therapeutic relationship as well, is how we see suffering as an intrinsic part of the human condition. And that's why we talk about healing, because there is suffering. That's why we talk about growth, because there is that potential. That's why we meet each other where we are at. And what do I mean by this? Some clients, some individuals will be just will want the CBT, and that will work for them. They will come with a checklist of things they need to do within that therapeutic term. And once that is completed, treatment is considered done. Others will want to go at another level. Why are these patterns in my life? Where is this coming from? And that's why in therapy, to meet the person where they're at, to be able to go to those depths of the soul, but to be centered in your space, because that's how we can be for the other.
Yeah, it's tricky. I do think there is something, and just that tenet reminds me of peer support. Why does peer support work so well? Because we have gone there, we have been there, we have the capacity to empathize for the depths. I'm thinking recently, we had to put my dog to sleep, and it was incredibly painful. And I've seen other people's dogs die, and thoughts and prayers, but this is the first time I had to walk through it myself. And it was kind of like a hospice situation for a month. So it was a lot of stress for about a month, and I was just trying to keep him comfortable. And then it happened. And then I cried and cried and cried and cried. And my eyes are still puffy from all the crying, and I can tell you, it definitely opened me up to what grief is really like. Like, I've had grief over a grandparent, grief over an uncle that died when I was young, over my grandpa when I was young, but I've never cried for 2 weeks, and like called his name in the middle of the night because I remember him, So even that, but I think, but I'm different. And I in the midst of it, I thought, this is intense. Like, this is why people go to psychiatry, to like, I need something. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I got physically ill where I was right after it happened, I was in bed for 15 hours with a migraine and nausea so bad I couldn't move. Like, it literally impacted me physically. I never expected that either. But so going through that experience is definitely, I don't know, it's made me grow. Like, even in his death, he was teaching me, like, this is what love is like. This is what suffering and grief, and it, it's intense. And so I do think there's a lot to, how can you can empathize to a certain point, I should say. And then when you go through something that's similar, and you have that ability to resonate when you've been on that grief, that same grief as I have, Yeah, so there's one comment from the audience. I just want to say it. It says, there is nothing wrong with me or any of us, exactly as I am or we are, period. We especially need to welcome this thinking if we have been in the mental health system. So
It's
that's the
beautiful.
mirror. That's the mirror, right?
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
say something about that?
Well, so as a therapist, we're not there to fix the person, to fix anything for that matter. It's, as I said, it's a privilege to be in that space, and it's very humbling. And to see everything is in a continuum, is in a spectrum in terms of where we are at any point in our life. So as I said, we fall, and we need someone's help to get it back up on our feet, right? And that's what it is all about, reaching out to one another. It's not about, far from blaming. It's, I'm here for you. And my presence as is a present. We know that saying. But when we say as a therapist, I'm here from you, yes, it is the training that we've gone through, but it's most of all, as you said earlier, how I resonate with what the person is bringing. Mm-hmm. And to know that it's someone needs help at this point in time in their life. I had an example with 2 young children the other day, and the little girl was very upset with her brother, was making her late to school. And I mentioned the example that when we have one hand that is hurt and we need to do something, the other hand is going to help, right? Until this hand gets better. So the next time when they go to school, the little girl says to her brother, brother, can we play a game of racing? And they race to go to school. And in a very playful way, they made it together on time. But this was just to say that we need each other. Not to blame, not to label. And that's where the diagnosis becomes tricky, because it's a blessing and it's for some people, and it's a challenge for many others. So how do we deal with that? Having a label for life, that can be very scary for many, because we are so much more. That's why we come back to that picture of the human being. Our potential is infinite. Our bodies are finite. In our matter reality, physical reality, we're finite, right? But in our potential, in our soul capacities, that's where the abundance is. And that's what gets me excited about doing this work.
Yeah. And I want to mention that in a couple of film screenings, I've said, I don't think I said it during yours, but when we have these labels and diagnoses, ABT, CBT, I experience myself learning to be a therapist, that when I'm sitting with someone and I'm trying to see them as, with the mirror, like I'm trying to see the human being inside there that's witnessing the suffering, the soul, the spirit, whatever you want to call it. I don't even know what to call it. Just the essence.
Whatever resonates, yes.
So I'm sitting there trying to see the person, and they're talking to me. When I would have those classes about ABT or CBT, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, what is this? Is this an attachment problem? Okay, it's attachment. You start thinking, you're thinking too much. The same goes with labels. And I wasn't, thank God I wasn't like this, but people see you through, that person is bipolar. This figure of being full of energy, that is a symptom of their bipolar. Do you see what I'm saying? So I feel like I would say in a screening that those things, to our best intentions to understand the human condition, can get in the way when you're with somebody who's suffering, because the therapist is busy trying to figure out, okay, what is this? What does that mean? What kind of homework should I give them? What do they need to work on? This is pathological. They need to fix that. That's not healthy. Who defines all that? So I found that I took an independent study because I didn't want to read. I didn't want to learn any of that. I was like, I can't. It's getting in my head, and I want to be there, present. There's nothing that needs to be there when you're present. Just your presence.
So what you're referring to is that heart space. The labels, the diagnosis, that's all in the head space.
Mm.
And one of the challenges, actually, it's 22 centimeters from the heart to the brain, but it's one of the longest roads to be traveled for the human being. So to bring the two together, the heart and the mind or the brain, that's very challenging. So that's why I love in therapy to engage the three of them. First of all, to meet the person where they're at. As I said, if someone really is goal-oriented, we'll work with that in that way. And if somebody is coming from that heart space, I cannot meet them with a head space. It's not going to work, right? Yeah. That it will be felt. It's very palpable. But also, how can we engage the will, the doing? And this is where some of the artistic components come in, because we know art goes where intellect doesn't. Mm-hmm. So to engage the three is very helpful. That's health. That's health, both physical and mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about that. Well, let's talk about suffering. So when I spoke to you last week, we talked about human beings making meaning. Can you talk about what does that mean? And maybe relate that to like mental illness, like the symptoms, our suffering, and what is the process, what is the role of the therapist in that meaning making process?
So, as I said earlier, suffering is an intrinsic part of being human. Also, what happens in suffering is we lose perspective of the bigger picture. I often refer it as we gain that laser vision. And this is absolutely necessary for survival. Let's say I'm in a car accident. I cannot think about what I ate yesterday. I need to focus here and now. Right. Like nothing else exists. And what happens, that becomes everything, right? And we live with that. That's when the trauma is not digested. Or that's what trauma is, an event that overwhelms the resources that I have as an individual. Mm-hmm. And it's not digested. From an energetic point of view, we have Peter Levine, who talks about energy trapped in our body, right? And how can we release that? He talks about how animals in the wild don't have the memory of the trauma. They would shake it right after they have escaped, right? It's either escape or you're done, or you escape, and once you escape, you shake it off. Human beings, we have, I would say, both the advantage and the disadvantage, that we not only experience it in our body, and we need to release it from our body, but also we have the memory of it. And we know also from the work of Bessel van der Kolk that the memory is not only in the brain, it's in the body. So how do we work with that, with releasing it from that perspective? And then often it doesn't make sense. Like, as meaning-making creatures, we're the only meaning-making creatures. We need to make sense of what happens in our life. And trauma does not fit into that. So what we do in therapy is this digestion process. And that can take different forms.
Yeah.
Often people would come at the beginning of the sessions and they would say, I want to forget about it. Or I want to go back to where I was, or I want to move on with my life. Others would come and say, I can't stand it when people tell me, forget about it. And I say, thankfully, we don't forget. Because that would mean we have dementia or something else. So that's a good thing. But the question is not about forgetting, but about integrating that event in my life.
Yeah.
So months or years later, I can say, such and such happened to me. And this is what happened as a result of that. I went through what I had never imagined. And this is how, and this is who I am. This is who I became. This is how I have grown because of that. So putting that in perspective, in the bigger perspective, that's where I see the role of the therapist, which lacks for survival reasons, as I said at the beginning. So putting that in the bigger perspective. So the therapy then becomes moving from surviving into thriving.
It reminds me of, I just talked to a friend yesterday who was mugged in New York City, and it was pretty violent and it was scary and he was terrified, and he's, I don't know. I think when I hear someone who's gone through a traumatic experience, there's almost like this quick rush to like put a lid on it. It happened yesterday, move on. Like our society is just like, move on. Where I think it's more like, don't resist it. Like let your body go through the process and feel what happened and feel that fear, but like trust your body that I think we forget we're mammals. We are animals. We are animals just like, the coyote that runs and gets the rabbit, and the rabbit freezes and plays dead, to not get killed. And then the coyote loses interest and walks away, So there's not enough emphasis on like being there in the moment with someone who's really suffering from something that's scary that happened to them. And that goes back to the point about how can we help people that haven't gone as far as, or I don't know, it always sounds mean when I say it like that, but we have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Or being in a space with someone who's intensely suffering without trying to fix them or give them a platitude or, some positivity stuff.
Can we stay in the muck?
What? Say that?
Can we stay in the muck?
Yes. Can we stay there in the dirt? Yeah.
The
dirt and the muck. Oh my gosh. Yes. All right. So let's see. Oh yeah. I wanted to mention one more thing. I wrote it on my little notes. When you say suffering is a human experience, when every time you've said it twice now. And when you say it, it feels like an elephant drops in front of me, like boom, suffering is part of being human. And I think we resist that. So, like all these things that we do to think like, but no, it's not. No, I can just take a pill for that. Or no, I can just pull up my bootstraps and move on from that. So can we talk a little bit about why is, what does that mean? Suffering is part of the human experience.
So I often have this analogy or this image of life as a tableau. And do we want it to be all pink?
Yeah.
Or it's the shades of light and darkness. It's the multicolors, the many colors in a tableau that make it come alive. I look at the painting behind you. I see dark colors and light colors. I mean, it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying far from that we need to look for the suffering. But if we negate it, if we push it away, then what are we learning? And how can we be for the other? We know the story of Buddha, how he was kept in that palace until he escaped and saw the suffering for the first time. Mm-hmm. He was kept away from the elderly, from the sick. We know what happened there.
Yeah.
And how can we be with the other person, for the other person, if I don't accept it as a condition? Then we would be in a huge denial. And we would limit our growth. There is a book, Blessed by the Scraped Knee. It's a classical children's book. And that's what the story of our life is, so that when children are young, they can fall in the presence of the caregivers. so that when they fall as adults, they know how to get up because they've had the example of being cared for, being looked after. So they can do it on themselves and for the others. I mean, this is all about being human, making sacrifices in freedom. And the challenge is that nothing in the media or in our culture, anything that we that is it's made as attractive to us is what's pretty, is what's even to the point of vanity, I would say. But when it comes to sensational news, it's all about killing or crimes.
Yeah.
So it I think is placed in the wrong order, or in the it's in the wrong place where the suffering is put.
Yeah. I think there's like a resistance. Like, I think that's what I'm feeling in myself. And see, now we're doing this and we're doing what we were talking about earlier. But when you said human suffering is part of the human experience, I felt a resistance inside of me. Like, but no, I can't take any more.
Want it. Exactly. No.
I can't take any more. I've had enough, you know,
Yes.
or I do my best against my best intentions of protecting my life and keeping it as safe as possible. I'm still going to experience more trauma. That is part of being on this planet. Like right now, we're all undergoing a collective trauma of being afraid of a virus that could kill us. That is a fact. We're all going through this together. Despite our best intentions of being safe and protecting ourselves and moving to a crime-free neighborhood or wearing your seatbelt, tomorrow you could get killed in a car accident, you know? And think
yet it doesn't mean that we don't do these things, right?
Yeah.
Trying to be safe, being healthy.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we stop doing these things because we'll suffer. What's the point?
Yeah.
Because in making meaning out of our suffering and of our joys, that's where the beauty in life is. It's not me being happy every moment of my life.
Yeah.
But it's when I rise after I've fallen and I can look at the sun again and enjoy those fleeting moments. That's what it is about.
That's hard. It's hard.
Oh, yeah.
I just feel like I'm in a dark night of sorts. So it's hard. I don't mean to get emotional, but it's like, it's hard to, when you're in the midst of grief or suffering or challenge, to think like, it's not going to be like this all the time. You know what I mean? It's temporary. Even the suffering is temporary. And that's part of the human condition also,
Yes.
that
Yes.
nothing is permanent and things are always changing and moving and you're always growing whether you want to or not.
And that's when the time comes for self-care, which is another aspect in therapy that I find many people equally resisting, just like suffering. And many would say, I don't know what that is. And we have to go through this. It's different from being selfish.
Yeah.
Self-care is not the same as selfish. Dan Siegel talks about self-pleasure is different than self-care. So again, there are nuances. So what does it mean to take care of myself? Besides going to therapy, sometimes it can mean just, I'm making a cup of tea, or I'm going to lay low today because that's not the time to go out and meet people.
Yeah. Someone in the comments said, so does this concept of integrating trauma she's talking about, does that translate to acceptance or is that different? And it relates to suffering, like, is there an acceptance, or how does one integrate the knowing that despite your best intentions, bad things will still happen, quote unquote, bad things, will still happen.
So there is a mentality in our culture today of do not give up, do not surrender, like be strong. And I bring, to meet that, I bring this notion of acceptance. Now, what does acceptance mean? That's the question. Does it mean that I'm a passive receiver of what happens to me in life? Or does it mean I am making sense, I'm accepting what is happening, and from then on, I choose how I will respond to this situation? So to know when to say no, that has to do with acceptance. To know when to take care of myself, that has to do with acceptance. To know when to come out of an abusive relationship, that is acceptance, because I am accepting the situation is such that I need to move out in order to be safe and healthy.
Yeah.
So acceptance can be empowering from that perspective. So one has to look at the nuances. I mean, languages can be very powerful, how we work with the words. So how do we look at the acceptance?
I'm really aware of the time. I don't want to keep you longer, but do you have time to answer one more question, or do you have to? Okay, so let's do that last question that I had before. Can we talk about, okay, I'll just read the question that I formed before, for our script or for our ideas. I'd love to talk about the aspects of time in the therapy process. For example, we have an illness now, like I have a cold right now, but the process of therapy is so much more than now. It's past, it's future, time, space, and a shifting between dimensions, between different realities, all happening right now. And then there's the way that I'm talking about that with you and how interacting with the scene world now, the phenomenology of that process. So what can we talk about time and space and therapy?
Yeah, oh, this is huge.
Yeah.
We can look at it from many angles. We can look at Goethean phenomenology, which is, as an observer, I go into the essence of the phenomenon to allow the phenomenon to speak to me. So that's another very long conversation. But this is very intriguing to me, because therapy in many ways is where we are testing the very things that are not questionable outside of the therapy room. What I mean by that is, in therapy, we can explore questions like, who am I? If I go outside in the world and don't know who I am, people will think I'm crazy, right? So in that way, we can be playful with it. But also, in therapy, we say, for example, the person is well-oriented in time, space, and person, right? So that the person in front of us is sane. So the therapist has to make sure of that for the other person and for themselves. But therapy itself challenges these very notions, because, and this is what gives me hope about the therapeutic process, we address in therapy events that happen way back in childhood, and we're bringing them now in this moment. If I were to ask you, Angie, for example, do you remember your grade 1 teacher?
I can't remember her name. Miss Talbert, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, notice what happened. You went in another place, in another time, and you're here.
Yeah.
So which dimension of reality are we talking about? Well, in therapy, we're challenging these notions, but also the hope that we can work with these layers of memory and bring them in the present. And that's what brings about healing. So that's one aspect. The aspect of space, again, things that happen not here and now, but in any place. So where are we? Well, even this virtual reality challenges that. But in therapy, is we can be anywhere, and we can bring suffering from childhood or something that happened yesterday within me or with my partner, for example, right? And the other aspect is the person. So who am I? We bring about something that happened in a dream that we can explore in therapy, or I feel like I'm taken advantage. I'm not seen for who I am. So we explore these very existential questions, and that makes me very very hopeful, because this very question of know thyself becomes the essence of therapy, which is interesting because it's one of the three axioms in the Temple of Delphi in ancient Greece. So the first one was know thyself. The second one was nothing to access. And the third one, surety brings ruin. So in therapy, we're in that space where it's not black and white. We can experience the different shades of being. And that's why this knowing of oneself brings all these elements about. I remember in psychology books, I would get even frustrated when we would read, the only thing we can say for sure is that we're not sure. And this idea of in therapy, we can go beyond that rigidity. There is more fluidity, and that's where growth happens. In that space where we are more fluid, we can be more of ourselves while we're exploring who we are.
I love that. And now I have to ask that last question because to close it out, because you just hit on it, can you talk about what does that mean that therapy should be individual?
Well, any breakthroughs that we have because it's an I-thou relation, and that is unique. So that cannot be replicated. If there is a breakthrough, it's in that moment. It cannot be even repeated with the same person in another session. So it's not prescriptive, it's not formulaic. The other thing you said earlier in the loss of your dog, how you mourned it. And that is unique to you.
Right.
So that in and of itself, because our life experiences are unique to us. So yes, we have these therapeutic approaches, we have this understanding, this theoretical constructs. And yet when it comes down to I, thou, that is unique. The other thing that you were saying from that, how from this experience of suffering, it moved into from the psyche, from your soul into your soma. So you were having these physical symptoms, right? So again, nobody else can have these physical symptoms from a similar experience. Somebody will experience it in their stomach, right? Somebody will experience it in other parts of their body. And that's what's unique. And the other element I'd like to bring is that bringing the circle of care. So working with different care providers, that also individualizes the treatment for each person. So these are some aspects that therapy or psychotherapy is not one-dimensional. It's not the only treatment, but somebody might be drawn to a sacrocranial therapist, or somebody might be drawn to doing yoga. Somebody might be drawn to focusing more. None of these are exclusive, right? But it's what the person would need at that moment and what speaks more to that person and that situation.
Totally. Yeah. Even in my own life, I've noticed that, you know, some things work for certain periods of time. And then as I grow and move past them, then I need to try new things. You know, I've done like equine therapy for a few years and that got me to a certain point, and then I moved on to something else, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's, you know, it's ever evolving, not one size fits all or one shoe fits all or anything like that.
And that's the beauty of the treatment in this field. It's not like, okay, I have a cold or I have an infection and here is the treatment.
Yeah.
Right, here is the medication. I'm prescribing you this. It's not prescriptive in that way.
Thank you so much. So Zheni, please, can you share with our audience if they'd want to learn more about you or maybe about anthroposophic psychology, where would they go?
Yes, there is a website, anthroposophicpsychology.org. And that's where we have different trainings, be it for self-development, be it for professional development. We're designing one for clinicians. And there is a list of practitioners as well that people can reach out. So yeah, that's one way to find out more.
And do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to leave with our audience? We talked about so much, so I don't know.
Yes. Well, one thing I would say is that in anything you do, find your center and let your heart be your compass. It will take you to the right place.
Oh, that's beautiful. I totally agree with that. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Angie, for all the work that you're doing and this mission that you're in, and everyone at Medicating Normal. It's a message we need to hear nowadays.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining from the audience for this live discussion. If you haven't seen Medicating Normal yet, please check our website at medicatingnormal.com/watch, and you can see a list of upcoming screenings. You can also look at our event tab on our Facebook page. We add more screenings there and we update the list very frequently. We also have a YouTube channel. It's called Medicating Normal, and every Wednesday and Friday at noon Central US time, we have more live interviews going on there and panel discussions and things like that. So in the next few weeks, we're going to have Dr. James Greenblatt. He's a doctor who uses functional medicine in his psychiatry practice. And we have Dr. CC Zai, a new psychiatrist who's been through SSRI withdrawal herself, and she's starting a new practice that will focus on deprescribing. Lastly, if you'd like to support our outreach efforts to bring the film and more conversations like this one, please consider a donation. Any amount helps. That's at medicatingnormal.com/donate. And thank you all for joining us today. Especially thank you to Zheni. I finally got your name right. I'm so sorry for messing anyway, thank you so much, Zheni, for spending an hour with us. Goodbye to everyone. Follow your center. I just love that message at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. All the best to you.